flawless experts who have all the answers. That's not this podcast. Instead, we chat with professionals who love what they do, have wisdom to share, and can laugh at their own mistakes. I'm Mark, and I'm the host of the WorkPlay Solutions podcast. So let's laugh, learn, and discover the joy of work. Boo, boo, boo. All right, Alan, we're on. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm fantastic.
Good.
I am here today with Dr. Alan Hughes, who's a professor of psychology and the interim dean to the Charter School of Education and Human Sciences at Berea College. And today's topic is, I don't know yet, because we're just going to discover as we go. Alan's an interesting guy. All right. So, Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
I am originally from central Kentucky. I went to college at Berea College in Kentucky. I went to graduate school in Kentucky and spent my first of my academic career in Rochester, New York. After I got sick of lots of snow, a lot of snow, I decided to move south and went job hunting. And Barry is a lot like Berea in some ways. The difference is Barry was founded by abolitionists, but its service to Appalachia is pretty genuine to like berries. I've been here since 2007, and it's been great. I am married with a wife, Jennifer. She's a nurse. Have a child who is 12. His name is Evan. And that is pretty much me in a nutshell.
Okay. So we like doing an icebreaker question to kick things off. So I'm going to pick from my deck number 30, the craziest thing I know about a relative.
I have he's passed away. I had a great uncle who went to prison for murdering 2 or 3 people, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a long time ago. Kentucky's a rough place.
I had no idea. Wow. For me, I always answer my own question. I learned when I was younger that my great-grandmother went to elementary school or kindergarten with Adolf Schicklgruber, who is also known by his other name, Hitler, which is just like mind-blowing. I don't know what he was like as a kindergartner. We're not going to talk about his exploits, but my great-grandmother went to school.
That's crazy.
With him.
It's easier to spell than the other word.
Yeah.
That's true.
And Alan, I know you are a big traveler. You just got back from a trip abroad. How was that?
It was very stressful, but it was good. We did a study abroad in Ireland.
Nice.
We've been trying to go for a couple of years, but clearly the world went crazy and made it complicated. So it was a course about vision and art. So my background is visual neuroscience. So all study abroad courses in the summer are meant to use the culture to teach the class. It's kind of like a laboratory. So my class was using really the architecture and the landscapes and the gardens and the cathedrals and the castles of Ireland to teach about visual perception. So let me give you a sort of a side note. Let's say look at paintings in galleries let's say from the Renaissance. You can, painters use lots of tricks like shading and lighting, contrast and color and occlusion and other things to give impressions of depth where there isn't any in the painting. So that's one example. So the course was designed to use those different venues to teach about perception. So it was 5-week class, 3 weeks were here online with prepping, and then the other 2 weeks were in Ireland. And the students also took a class with Kristen Diliberto, who's a faculty in psych, and her class was about the psychology of eating and drinking. It was just stressful to take 14 students to Ireland. It went fine. It was fine. It's just, I've never done that before, and other people in our school do a lot of it. I had never done it. It was really, it was good. It was good for them. I think it worked out. So this is the oddest thing I remember seeing, which had nothing to do with my class, had to do with her class. We went to a buffalo cheese farm. Okay. Because they literally make cheese out of buffalo milk. So there's water buffalo in Ireland. The only farm in Ireland with water buffalo. These are Asian water buffalo. I mean, the real deal. It was nuts. So they're petting water buffalo. It was in the middle of Ireland. It's crazy. Anyway,
I think that if you ever have a chance to play 2 truths and a lie, your truth should absolutely be, I petted a water buffalo in Ireland.
Right.
Because that's awesome.
I've got pictures. No one's gonna believe it. Videos. Anyway.
Water buffalo cheese. Oh yeah, man,
there's this guy. They went back and they imported all these buffalo from Asia, and because the Asian buffalo are less aggressive than African water buffalo, so it's a little bit easier. But It's a real deal. It was something.
I love this. Every time we record, I learn something completely new about something I'm not expecting. So I had no idea culinary foods and drink related to the water buffalo.
I thought initially, because this wasn't my class, I'm just along for the ride. I thought it was like buffalo, like buffalo sauce. I didn't know. And so we go to this
Where's my chicken wings?
And I think, what the hell is buffalo? And it was wild. Anyway.
That's hilarious. Going back to the visual perception, is there a particular painter or work of art that you could point to and say, this is someone whose work is very interesting to my field?
No, not really, because I don't study art per se.
Okay.
It was simply a vehicle.
Okay.
Because when you look at the paintings, it's interesting that at that point in time, no one knew the things we know now, but they were still able to create these really strong impressions. So as a side note, when I got my master's degree, the guy I worked with, his name was Joe Bilotta, and Joe's PhD advisor, his name is Israel Abramov, and Izzy is English, but he taught at SUNY in City in New York. Anyway, he was hired by, I forgot which museum in New York City, to look at the lighting that hangs over paintings, because by changing the illuminant or the color temperature of the light, people look at the paintings longer. Because there's aesthetic value, because this course had a lot to do with aesthetics too. So people would look at things and enjoy them longer based upon the color temperature of the light, because white's not white. There's different kinds of white. So based upon the filament that was in the actual bulb and its color temperature would impact how long people would actually stay and look at the painting, because there's all these aesthetics wrapped into art. So it's stuff like that is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Really.
I think my experience with that is going to Lowe's or Home Depot and trying to buy a light bulb and just feeling very overwhelmed about the choices.
There's a side note. There's a guy named Barry Schwartz. He's a faculty member at Swarthmore.
Okay.
Wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice. Choice is bad.
Okay.
You go to the grocery store and look for some detergent. You're looking at the aisle going, I wish it was just like one. Toothpaste, toothbrushes, jeans. There's just too many choices. So again, choice is bad. People like choice, but too much choice.
Yeah, I agree totally. I read Nudge by Richard Thaler, who's an economist. He's done work with Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. But Nudge is all about choice architecture and how it's important to create the right number of choices and the right context. And that whole book was fascinating. So
let's read that, Nudge.
It's good. Thinking Fast and Slow is better. If I would have read Nudge first, I probably would have been just as wowed. They're both really good. See, I already knew Alan's interesting. So
I am very interesting. I'm a fun guy.
All right, getting into your expertise and field of research is neuroscience as it relates to vision and psychology. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how does the brain make sense out of the world around us visually for a layperson?
I teach a course in perception, and what's interesting about the senses is all the senses basically work the same. The way that the brain helps you to see color is exactly the way you taste objects. So the perception of taste is fundamentally not any different than the perception of color. What happens in vision is you look around a visual landscape, you can identify different types of things. There's color, there's motion, there's orientation, there's texture, there's shading, all that. And there are different neural pathways that begin with nerve cells in the eye that take that apart and transmit it up separate pathways to the brain. So what that means is like any other system of the brain, things are very compartmentalized. There's a weird case in the archives about this woman who used a generator in her house, which was just a bad idea, and had damage to a part of her brain that helps you process motion. So her perception
the fumes from the exhaust. Okay.
Right. And her perception of color was fine, perception of detail was fine, but her life was like a strobe light. It was all in snapshots because the fluidity of motion is gone.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, like you have systems in the brain dedicated just for sleep wakefulness, or just for the circadian clocks, or just for temperature regulation, or just for thirst and hunger. The brain is very compartmentalized into different sections doing different things. And it's kind of like an engine which is designed to do different things, right? So if you were to reach under your hood and you yank something out, something's going to break, right? But collectively, all those things work together to give you a very coherent. So a simple example where that doesn't go well is something like synesthesia. Because synesthesia is where people...
can you define that?
Synesthesia is where people experience the wrong sensory quality. So they'll hear colors or taste shapes.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So what happens is that you have association areas in your brain, dedicated parts of your brain for vision, dedicated parts for touch, dedicated parts for hearing. They call them primary receiving areas. Your eyes send information to the back of your head where the occipital lobe is, and your ears send information to the temporal lobes on the side of your head. And that's a fact. That's just the way it works. But there's also association areas in the parietal lobe, which is kind of in the middle upper part of your brain on the sides, that integrate all that because you experience those things together. Well, sometimes that doesn't go well, and there's mismatch and miswiring, and people begin to have the wrong sensory experience for the certain kind of item. So a good example of that, we had a couple, which is fascinating. We had a speaker come about 10 years ago from Vanderbilt, and he, again, was a neuroscientist who studied vision, but somehow he got involved in synesthesia, and there's a kind of synesthesia called graphemic synesthesia.
Okay.
And what that means is that when people look at let's say text, like a black ink as a book, like you're reading a book, each letter will appear a different color. And you might think, well, they're just making that stuff up. But they're not. What happens is these really ingenious experiments where they will imagine a computer monitor and imagine that on this computer monitor you see 50 letter R's all jumbled together. And somewhere among those 50 letter R's is a letter P. And your job is to find the letter P as quickly as possible. They do it instantly because it sticks out.
Because it appears as a different color.
Right.
Wow.
They're not making it up. Okay. So in their mind's eye, those letters have different colors. I have a form of synesthesia because different days of the week, months, anything ordered in my mind's eye have different colors to them. But that's harder to explain. But it's fascinating. That just tells you that in those situations that when people they'll hear music and different musical notes will have a color attached to it because the systems that normally are separate begin to get more fused in a way that's not supposed to happen. The brain is fascinating. It's just perception. So it's perception is your window into someone's sense of self. And when people, the way they experience the world is all dictated upon the systems that experience the world. It's amazing.
I think you nailed it right there. As I've been thinking about how to prepare for this conversation, I think one of the things that drove me to want to interview you is this idea in the business world, we're always talking about vision and perception as constructs. Like vision means I'm talking about the future of my company and our goals and our initiatives, and perception is all about conflict and interpersonal reactions. But I think there's probably a lot we can learn from the actual perception science and actual, not that those social sciences aren't actual, but you know what I mean? How the brain actually perceives vision in its technical definition, not its metaphorical one, and how we perceive senses in its technical definition, its brain definition, not in our metaphorical ones. I've been pondering that in my own head going, I know there's something there, and I think you just nailed it. So jumping off of that idea, how do those perceptions affect our behavior? How does vision and perception and what's going on in the brain affect our behavior?
Most people who study visual science and visual neuroscience don't really ask that question. They don't really say, well, what does this really mean for someone's behavior? So I'm going to give a couple of examples. We love examples. We love stories. There's something that's called the useful field of view.
Okay.
And what that means is that attention, it's like a lot of researchers study things like inattentional blindness. There's so much stuff happening out in the world. It's impossible for you to attend to all of it. You miss things. So they call it like change blindness. Like you'll see a picture and something goes away, like you see that stuff on social media. Well, in real life, it's like, well, how good are you at detecting the minute changes on a daily basis. There's no way you pick up all of it. And there's been this fascinating studies over the years that looked at some of that. So here's one example. There were these studies where it's called the gorilla study. You ever heard of that?
Oh, I think I know the one you're talking about. I hope so.
You watch a video and
Are they playing basketball?
Right. Well,
yes.
The people are watching these. What they do is they tell them to count the basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many times do these college students pass the basketball back and forth? And people don't notice the gorilla that comes in and beats his chest and looks at you. But more fascinating, the same guy's name's Daniel Simon. He was a Harvard psychologist. He did some where they would have a person come in. They would come in to participate in research at Harvard. And there's a guy at a desk, and this guy acknowledges them and talks to them, and the guy goes beneath the desk, and someone else pops up. Dressed the same, looks the same, but not the same, and people don't notice it. They just don't pay attention.
It's a different person that just kind of looks similar.
Yep. There'll be the case where we just see these experiments where someone's asking for directions between this guy on the street, and someone comes between them carrying a door, and they switch places. And the person who was asking directions of the stranger didn't notice it's a new stranger because you just don't focus on details. When you ask about what does it do to your daily life, that's a good example of how attentive are you visually. Another practical example is going back to this useful field of view is when I was in grad school, there was a woman, she had been a faculty I think she ended up going to University of Alabama, Birmingham. Her name was Karlene Ball, and she studied visual attention and driving. What happens is that when you drive, especially as you get older, this useful field of view shrinks. So imagine driving your car but looking through a paper towel holder. Like that little hole. And what they would do is they would go out with these older drivers, and this was in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and they would drive around Bowling Green with their helmets on in the car and measure all the times they would mess up. And because again, they're driving, looking basically through a very small peephole. So they would get some baseline data on these older adults, and it wasn't all older adults, just some older adults. They would then bring them back into a lab, and they would basically teach them how to find Waldo. And they would teach them basically a video game. And over some months of training, they would get their useful field of view to increase.
Okay.
And then put them back in the car. And there was measurable impact that visual attention window can get bigger with practice. It's not a done deal.
Okay.
Because the brain is very placid. It's very malleable. Even in old age, it's still malleable. And it was fascinating. But that just shows you that, again, those are some impacts of how you actually are able to understand the impact of vision on your daily life. It just depends on the field. There's all kinds of examples.
Yeah, I love that example of the paper towel roll and field of vision. There's a classic activity in the experiential ed world called Cyclops Tag, where you intentionally introduce limited vision. So you cover one eye, take the other hand, and make that paper towel size thing with your hand, and you try to tag another person in a big tag game, and you can't run because people are just like bumping into each other like crazy. And the metaphors that come from that about what am I missing, my tunnel vision, and just the learnings that are capable from kids all the way to corporate executives after doing that kind of experience are profound often. So,
well, you're right. There's another example would be like with 3D vision, depth perception. I don't have that. I have amblyopia, which is because I had cataracts as a child. I was born with cataracts, and they left the cataracts on too long, which meant that you have these things in your brain called ocular dominance columns, which allows both eyes to fuse and be used for vision. Well, it's equivalent to having your eyes sutured shut for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So I don't have stereopsis, which means I probably shouldn't drive, but I do. It's all right. But it's impacts. I can't fly.
If you're from the DMV, please.
Yeah. No, my vision, so it's because my eyes aren't correctable to 20/20, and then I have different optical power, which means it's impossible to have stereopsis. But I rely on other cues that are monocular. But it means there's certainly things I can't do. Like I can't join the military. I can't fly a 747. Golf is impossible because I don't have stereopsis. But for most things, it doesn't bother me. So another example you asked how it might impact your life. This is really fascinating. You have different kinds of daytime vision, nighttime vision, right? You have rod vision, cone vision. So your visual world is segmented in the sense that when you're in dim conditions, you have rods, which they call scotopic, which gives you the ability to see really well when there's not much light. You have cone or daytime vision, which lets you have good color vision, good detail vision, and those things during daylight. So there's this really fascinating experiment you can do to prove there's a difference. So what you do, and I've done this because I used to do all these experiments in dark adaptation. You go to Walmart and get like one of those like beige patches that you can put on your eye, and the sticky kind, stick it on there, and get some gauze, and then get a pirate patch. I have some pirate patches in my lab, and completely cover one of your eyes, and stay that way for 45 minutes. It takes about 45 minutes for the rod system to fully dark adapt. It's like when you go to a theater; it takes a while for that, you know. So you do that, and you don't do anything. Just sit there. Don't drive. Don't go downstairs because you're not going to have any stereopsis. Yeah. Sit there for like 45 minutes. Then go into a closet where there's no light, just maybe a little crack under the door, and take the thing off your eye. It's insane because one eye is going to be completely blind because you've not been dark adapted. The other eye has been dark adapting for 45 minutes. You get this really weird illusion because one eye is clear as mud and it's clear as day in the dark. It's clear. And the other eyes, you can't see anything. It just shows you the difference of how the visual system adapts. It changes. It's amazing. It's a fun illusion.
Oh, wow.
You know.
You had me at pirate.
Yeah. It's my trick-or-treat outfit, right?
Awesome. I'm just pondering submitting that expense report. Dr. Hughes, can you please explain why you bought 600 pirate patches? Research. And the hats and the swords maybe are important. No, we used to do all kinds of. I've been dark adapted so much. You get bored. You try different things. But anyway. Okay. And if this question is too personal, feel free to nix it. Did some of the limitations in your own vision propel you into this field of study, or is there a relationship there?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Probably. It's a little ironic in some ways because when I was in college, I took a class in physiological psychology, which is technically what I am trained as. And the chapter that I did the worst on was in vision. And I don't know. So I went to when I was going to go to graduate school, and I decided to apply for graduate programs. I hadn't done the right stuff. I didn't have the great graduate record exam scores, whatever. And I got accepted by this graduate program at Western Kentucky is a master's in applied experimental. And the lab that I was going to work with was this Joe Bilotta guy who was a physiologist who studied vision. And I guess I said the right things to get his attention, and that was it. It was sort of my trajectory because I got thrown into a lab studying vision and fish vision. And we would use the fish as a model for color vision. So in fact, the things I've done in humans, we've also done in fish because the fish is a very, very interesting model. And I think that's really the story, is that I got this happen by chance or something into this lab, and that's what he was doing.
Okay.
So if I would have been accepted into a lab studying, I don't know, pig emotions, I would have studied. That's how it would have been. I think the synergy though, and the kind of the energy I have is because of my own issues. I understood those things, and I don't know. It's interesting. There are people I know who are just very world-class researchers in color vision who are completely colorblind. You get your passion sometimes falls where your own deficits are, and out of curiosity. Okay. So I think that is the answer.
Yeah, no. As I said before we started, we're not trying to fit this into any particular mold or quotable. Just, we'd rather have what's real and authentic.
It's all genuine, I promise.
Yeah. All right. We referenced Daniel Kahneman's book earlier, Thinking Fast and Slow, one of my favorite books. He coined this phrase, what you see is all there is, talking about failure to consider alternate options when presented with either or choices. What do you think about that idea? Or does it not have anything to do with our conversation?
The only thing that I would say, because he's more of a computer scientist, honestly, because of the work he did in decision-making, I would say that how it's relevant to this conversation is probably more about, well, what's the relationship between what's in the physical world versus what's in the perceptual world. Okay. Perception is that adage, perception is in the eye of the beholder. You've heard that before. So the humans are very much, we're the best. It's like, look what we have. We really aren't. We've gotten, God screwed us over in some ways. Because there are creatures who can detect things that you can't fathom. So one of the things I teach perception is to get students to understand is that there's a physical world, and what you understand of that physical world is completely contingent on the equipment you've been given to detect it with. So what I would take from that is that the notion of what is reality or what's real is based upon how you interpret it. So here's an example. This is one thing that bothers students. There's no such thing as color. Color is not real. There's no zero. Any physicist tells you that, you should fire them because they're lying to you. It's just, there's no such thing as color. Color is completely, there's nothing inherently colored about the wavelengths of light. So Roy G. Biv, you learned in first grade, is a big lie. So
you're blowing my mind, Alan.
It's all a lie, right? The world's a lie, Mark.
I'm marching down to the elementary school and shaking my fist.
Get your money back. So what happens is that when those light rays bounce off objects and strike your eye, their interaction with the pigments in your eyes create this response that you interpret as color. In fact, the way the brain processes color is not much different than the way it understands pitch. Pitch is also not real. Like, there's no such thing as high pitch, low pitch. That's all. So there's frequency. Like, there's you strike a piano, there's high keys, low keys, but that frequency when that hammer strikes the chord creates a vibration that you interpret as high pitch or low pitch, but it's not real. It's only because that's how the brain interprets it. It's physically there, but how you translate that into a private perception, a subjective experience, is solely based upon what's in your head. You know, things like when people use words like sweet, sour, bitter, that's also not real. I mean, it's a taste in, but you interpret it a certain way. So I'd say there's lots of just helping people understand that perception is all about the equipment you have to interpret what's out in the physical world. And it's intriguing because I think there's so many creatures out there that have this amazing ability. So here's another example. Like, I ask this question often on exams, like, what if, why would a Brian shrimp, which has 6 types of cones, think you're colorblind? Because humans have 3 different classes of cones, which gives them this really ability to see color. Well, they have more than that. Would they interpret that as you being, well, you have less. Your vision must be less, just have the less richness than mine would have. My point is that the physical world is not the same thing as what's in your head. It's just not. It's there. I think it makes it interesting.
That is all for part 1 of our conversation with Dr. Alan Hughes. Stay tuned next week for part 2. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review, tell a friend, give us a gold star, or call my grandma. And if you want unforgettable events and training that's fun, like for real fun, get started today at workplaysolutions.com. I know I want that. Boo, boo, boo.